from the College by the Lake, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Local, regional, national, and international guests discussing the issues and topics affecting the way you live are on Forum, the North Idaho College Public Forum, with your host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart.
Welcome to our continued series entitled An Affair with the Arts and Humanities. We're very pleased today to particularly emphasize one of our subtopics in the symposium that we've been conducting at North Idaho College called An Affair with Words. As I indicated to you before on the previous program, in the spring of 1995 there was this 7-day symposium at North Idaho College celebrating the 25th anniversary of the North Idaho College Popcorn Forum. We're very delighted to have two guests today that are highly qualified to address this particular sub-area as writers and as performers, and they have really stimulated the audiences at North Idaho College. I first welcome to the program Mr. John J. Coombe, who is often advertised as a cowboy poet, but he does write into many areas of poetry. Our guest has appeared on National Public Radio and USA Cable Network, and has performed concerts and readings certainly throughout the entire western United States. His poetry is an oral tradition that he takes from cowboys and others, I should say, in other fields, and is sharing that with audiences, and he's highly entertaining in that way. John, welcome to the program. It's a pleasure to have you here, and thank you for the time you've given to North Idaho College.
Thank you.
And I'm very also pleased to welcome Rebecca Wells to our program. She comes to us from Seattle, Washington, and has toured nationally performing her original work. She can be described in many different ways. She is an author of novels, and she also turns those into really dramatic plays. I should add that she also has written for television. In fact, among her works has been 2 episodes that she did for Designing Women, which is a television program that most of you are very familiar with. Ms. Wells is probably best known for her novel called Little Altars Everywhere, which she has adapted into a one-person play that goes most of the time for about 90 minutes and is very dramatic. It is about a family called the Thornton family in Louisiana, where she has very deep roots, where she grew up, and it is a very complex play about the humorous life and magical and oftentimes tender and confused life of this very interesting family that she has created. I should add that she has been well recognized for her work. She received the Western State Arts Award for fiction for her novel that we've just discussed. Rebecca, welcome to the program. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
I'm pleased to have 3 panel members today to join and question these 2 guests on this very stimulating topic. First of all is Janelle Burke, who's an attorney in the state of Idaho. Next to her is Steve Schink, who is the Dean of College Relations and Development at North Idaho College. And we're happy to have a visiting panel member and a colleague on the faculty at North Idaho College, Tim Rarick, who heads the drama department. I shall ask Janelle to commence the questioning.
Well, Rebecca, I'd like to start with you and ask you something about your art form and how you began to do this. Have you always liked words? When people like words as children, do you think they're going to eventually become someone who might want to write?
Well, I grew up in a very rich, wonderful, fertile storytelling culture. I grew up in a small town in the South. And the South is, first of all, very Bible literate. It loves stories. It loves symbolism. Louisiana is an interesting mix of French Catholics and North Louisiana Baptists. They're great storytellers. I grew up in a spirit of raconteur, where a good storyteller was highly valued. So I loved to listen to stories, and I loved to listen to conversations and dialogue as a child. I always wrote in high school and I wrote in college, but I trained as a professional actress, and I was an actress for many years, breathing life into someone else's words and other playwrights, whether it was a classic or a contemporary, looking for the meaning and the shape and the emotion and story underneath those words. I began writing my own material in '82 with my one-woman show Splittin' Hairs, and then I wrote a play called Gloria Duplex, for 5 characters and 4 musicians before I began to write fiction. I think that kids who are exposed to storytellers and who learn that stories have value and that they help us clarify what it is to be human. And of course, no one ever said that to me growing up. I just mean that it was there. People would stand back and listen to a good storyteller, and then when he or she walked away, they're going, she knows how to spin a tale. So a lot of that comes out of my background and my love and thankfulness for words to be able to move me into another world.
And now for you, your background was a cowboy background, John.
Mm-hmm.
And so how did you grow up and get into the arts and the humanities?
Growing up on a farm, it was more of a farm background, but we had cattle. It was a lot of farming, ranching kind of operation, and always writing poetry. Growing up really alone on this farm and by myself writing poetry. And some friends put me on a stage in a bar and got me reciting this poetry in a bar setting. And I just kind of got lucky that the cowboy poetry is real popular these days, and the arts councils kind of noticed me and made a transfer with me, put me on arts council stages. So now that's where I perform mostly.
And so yours was a way, too, of expressing words, expressing what you felt, and also expressing what was going on around you, of telling the story. Is that correct?
Yeah, the cowboy poetry tradition is, in a big way, storytelling, almost rhyming storytelling.
Steve Sheen.
Rebecca, I was struck before we started the show by the fact that both of you, you and John, are accomplished writers and accomplished performers. Has that worked well for you in your career? Any special challenges and maybe any special benefits from combining those two talents?
One of the benefits of being both a trained actor and a writer is the ability to enter a character fully. I'm trained in a basic Americanized approach to Stanislavski's method, where my body and my mind and my heart have learned to regularly let my own life experiences marry with that of a character, so that I use my own sense memory to feel and taste and experience the dreams and the needs of these characters in a way that an actor does. The writer part of me then works with that actor part to transcribe some of that, so that there's a real kind of working together between the actor and writer, and I'm thankful for that. The tricky part is in balancing the solitude time that you need as a writer with the very, very different energy of performing your work. And that's something that I'm sure I'll spend the rest of my life trying to fine-tune how I spend a year. For right now, for instance, I'm very much holed up in my writing studio finishing my new novel, Divine Secrets of a Yaya Sisterhood, which is due out from HarperCollins in 1996. The actor part of me is going, come on, when can we get on the stage again? I'm ready to press. And the writer part of me is sitting there in sweatpants, still editing, still revising. And so it's how to develop an easy, truce working relationship between those two parts, because believe me, when they start battling with each other, it's a terrible inner civil war. So it's an ongoing process of recognizing the strengths of each and letting them complement each other.
I enjoyed your answer and your discussion about storytelling. Do you think that it makes you a better writer of stories when you can put on that other hat and imagine yourself later telling those stories?
I don't know if I actually think about the future performance of a piece when I'm writing it. However, when I write, I, on some level, always assume a listener. I assume that there is a listener to the tale. And I like to use a friendly image. I like to use an image. J.D. Salinger has a wonderful quote in one of his short stories that the image that that some kids, wise kids of his use, is a picture of this woman in a green dress who sits in a swing on the front porch and waits every day for their radio program. So sometimes I'll picture her, and I'll picture this person wants to hear this story, and that will help draw it out of me. So picturing and assuming a listener forces me to clarify my tale, I like to think, keep it entertaining, and also write it in such a way that many people can understand it.
John, what about you? I know you're going to leave here for another performance, and I'm sure after that there's another and still another beyond that one. Do you have a difficult time balancing the need to find quiet time to write, find time to be on the stage and perform, and I would assume find some time to perfect that performance craft as well?
Everyone's always short of time for everything, but yeah, there is a time to write and a time to perform. Most of my better poetry comes from times while I'm doing something else, working on a farm, driving a tractor for 12 hours. It starts to come, or riding a horse. The poetry I do seems to come to me while I'm busy doing other things. But I do set aside time each day to write.
You mentioned in your performance that, and I don't know whether this was a little comic relief or whether you were actually serious about the middle part of your performances is where you try out new material on an audience. Is that a big part of how you get to the point where the act is just exactly the way you want it to be?
The first part, like for about the first third of what I'm doing, I feel pretty confident it's material that I know goes over well. And then the last part, I want that to go well too, because that's what I'm going to leave them with. But in the middle, I can play around and try out things and work on things. Usually goes pretty good. I don't know. I'm working on like a lot of free verse. Cowboy poetry tends to have a real strong rhyme and meter, but I'm getting to know poets, learning a lot from poets who use free verse more, and so the things I'm learning from them I'm playing around with in the middle of my show, and as time goes by I think it'll probably start to infest the rest of my act.
Tim Rarick.
Well, I was just thinking about something that I wanted to tell Rebecca. I've had the good fortune of spending a lot of time with her since she's been here, but as I watched her read today, I think I could have guessed that she was an actress writing, because she mentioned Stanislavski, and Stanislavski was an acting teacher who believed that we have everything that we've ever done in our life is recorded. We've got it in that magnificent computer that is the human brain, and actors, are people that work at getting those things, pulling those things up to the surface, much more than the rest of us do. And her writing is so vivid in its detail that it is the actress in her that, and I'm not saying other writers can't do this, but it certainly is the training of an actress, I think, that brings up those details so specifically and so clearly. This afternoon as I was listening and you heard those details emerge, there's a lot of actress training in there that evokes so much feeling as a result of specific detail, and it was very nice. I enjoyed it very much.
I want to interject here too, and I just really echo what Tim is saying. As I sat in the audience and watched you perform two characters out of Little Altars Everywhere, my reaction was that if you have a writer, and then, which you often do, and then you have different individuals who are the actors to that process, I was convinced today that something's lost. Again, with Rebecca, you both writing it and acting it, you have a great advantage, and your detail was absolutely remarkable. And so I'd like for you to share something with our viewers in relation to that, both in Splitting Hairs and Little Altars Everywhere. You have this incredible ability with the English language to describe not only in great detail, but one can visualize the actions that's going on. One can see the river, one can see the trees and so forth as you describe the environment in Louisiana. And one of the characters that you dealt with today was Lulu Walker. And, I have two things to say. Number one is that book is so beautifully set up to to do the different performances you do and take one, and you obviously can't do them all in one performance. It gives you a lot of variety from place to place. I wished I could travel and see you do them all. But tell us a little bit about this one character for our viewers that may be reading the book in the future.
About Lulu Walker?
Yes.
Oh, Lulu Walker. Lulu Walker is named for Tallulah Bankhead, even though her father didn't want her mother to name her that. Her mother said she carried the child, she'd name her what she wanted. And Lulu, in her way, does try to live up to Tallulah Bankhead, who described herself as pure as the driven slush. We find Lulu in that chapter as a young girl who is a terrific shoplifter. She describes herself as the finest shoplifter in Garnet Parish. And she is ostensibly a bad, tough little girl. In fact, she's really a middle child in that family who's gotten a little lost. And in that story, what does she do? She sets out and goes to the cowboy store in Thornton, Louisiana, and tries to steal her daddy a hat. She says, I want a hat that'll keep the sun from baking down on his head when he's in the fields, because those feed store caps just don't do it. So she goes to this elaborate scene ripping off this hat and then lying outrageously about who she is when she's caught. She makes up the name. They ask her what her name is, and she says, Karina Axel. She completely fabricates an entire story for herself. And I love Lulu because she is a bad little girl. She's a tough little girl. And the reason I love her is because she is determined to make herself known within that family, however awkward and however bad it looks. So her outrageousness kind of has an endearing quality to it. And as I get to know her further, I see and kind of love the different members of this family for the miraculous ways that they turn their wounding around in an attempt to be who they are, which is what happens in every family. And if we're lucky, we're able to redeem some of that wounded love within a family. And that's basically what this novel is about.
Did I read this correctly? As I was listening to you, and this story is evolving, and when they treat her a certain way, the experiences she's having, are they impacting her? That they're making, and obviously, as you're indicating, she was crying out for some attention, but also as you unfold this character, from the kind of reaction you're getting, is she changing also?
As I perform her, you mean? Oh, yes, and that's one of the things that I love about performing, is it really tells me what I've written. I mean, I find out in my actor body what a writer mind has written, because I read these words, and if I invest the time and open myself up like an actor does, I think, who wrote this, you know, and what does this mean? And I understand it on a different level. When I was writing that book, I was performing all of those chapters long before they were set in stone, and I was constantly revising after the performances, because I was learning what worked, what felt false, learning where I couldn't breathe because the sentence was too darn long, which means it was going to be too long on the page, too. Learning from my audiences. Once it's set, I learn what I've written in new ways. And hopefully I've written something that doesn't get too boring after the first couple of performances.
Well, and as you change from one character to another, when you change your expressions, you change your voice, of course. When you're writing each of these characters, do you try to, how do you put yourself in, you know, and there's the young boys and the place, how do you move from one character to another one? And I've heard of some actors saying, when doing a particular movie, I live that part. How do you get that much inside the character that you're doing?
A lot of that, I think, is acting training. And combined with what I'm learning in writing this new novel, which uses an omniscient narrator much more fully. The first book is all first-person narrative, which is very rich, first-person narrative is, but it has its own limitation. As I'm pulling up with the omniscient narrator who can see everything, I'm applying a sort of writerly distance and authority that the first person doesn't have. The first person is much more like an actor's job. I'm telling the story. So when I write, I see things. I mean, I'm always watching what happens. I see it like a little movie, and it varies. Sometimes I'm watching the characters doing it, and sometimes I'm feeling the feelings that they're going through. More often than not, I'm feeling the feelings.
That's a great explanation of the creativity of artists. I've heard that on this program on a number of occasions. John, we have a very similar experience with you. First of all, I'd like for you to tell the viewers, we keep advertising you as a cowboy poet, but tell our audience the different kinds of areas that you get into. Not only do you do cowboy stories and all, but you talk about farmers and you talk about miners and so forth. Would you share that with the viewers?
Well, cowboy poetry, the title, I'm not so sure it's all that old. It was used 10, 11 years ago in Elko, Nevada when they first started having a poetry gathering there. But it's more all-encompassing. A lot of people prefer the title Western poetry because prospectors, loggers, farmers, all these different segments of the Western culture were writing poetry in the same form. In my performance, I talk about farming, having grown up on a farm, and a lot of my poetry relates to these other areas.
I watched you. You and Rebecca both have a very similar talent. You know how you get into your writing, and as you play this out on the stage. And I saw you moving too. I could visualize you as a cowboy and then as a farmer and gold rush and so forth. But you have agreed to share one of your poems with us. Would you identify that, and then the viewers would appreciate really a small sample of what you do.
Into doing a poem. Okay, this poem actually just got published this year in an anthology by Gibbs Smith called Humorous Cowboy Poetry, and I suppose if someday I'll be gone from this world, but this poem will probably be floating around. It's called A Giant 4-Point Buck. In a meadow next to a graveled road on game department land, there stood a giant 4-point buck right in the palm of my hand. I had my rifle loaded and the animal in my sights when a station wagon drove up to me, a man, his kids, and wife. This family started pointing and taking pictures too. I put the rifle in my truck. What else was I to do? The man said to me, "What you've just done was a kind and gentle act." I said, "My house is down the road. I guess I'll just go back." That station wagon drove by my place that afternoon at 3. I smiled and waved at the family. They smiled and waved at me. But I'm not too proud of how I cussed in the front yard where I stood when I saw my giant 4-point buck tied down to the auto's hood. That's it.
Well, thank you. That's a great example for our audience. Janelle Burke.
I want to start with John this time and ask you how much of your material is from the past and how much is from the present, or do you mix the two? And then I'll ask Rebecca the same question. But is it the past or is it the present, or do you mix the two, and how do they fit together?
The things I write are from my own experience, so it all has to do with the present. But I do recite, I do devote a portion of my performance to poetry that's traditional poetry, anywhere from 100 to 135 years old. And of course that is a reflection of the past, but a lot of it really relates well to today.
You pick out those pieces, in other words, that have a relevance to today's life.
Yeah, I'm pretty choosy, and I read a lot of cowboy poetry, and a lot of it's really good, but it's not right for my performance because I want it to relate to the things I like to talk about on stage and also relate well to our times.
Rebecca, how about you? How much is the past? And we talked about that a little bit in the first question today at the beginning of the show. But how much of it is the past and how much of it is the present? And how do you relate the two?
I'm not sure I understand your question. How much of what is the past?
When you're writing and when you're performing, how much do you draw upon your past experiences, the things that have happened to your family that you have heard from generations past? How much is it the present? I think you always want it to relate to the present, I would assume.
Well, I'm not writing nonfiction. I'm writing fiction.
Right.
I'm not really talking about my family. I'm talking about a family that I've made up, that I've created.
Right.
And the question is a tricky one because the blend of present and past, our utter incomprehension of what memory even is and how memory marries with imagination to create something new is a complex, beautiful, I think, miraculous process. When I'm writing, and I think when anybody is creating, one is cooking, if you will, at a stove where past and present and future come together in a new mixture. Because even if you're writing about something that actually happened historically, you're writing it in the present. So something of the present is going to be involved in that. So that's a tricky question also about fiction, because when you ask me how much is in the past, well, I'm making up this fiction. Has it happened in the past? Not really, since it's being created right now. And if the question is how much of it is drawing from my own past, that's also sort of tricky too, because there's so many different kinds of truths. There are emotional truths, there are legal truths, as you know as an attorney, and then there is narrative truth. There is the truth of story. So not at all to be difficult about the question, but I think it raises all sorts of different considerations about what creativity is and how imagination exists and coexists with what we call reality. So I figure when I'm writing or when I'm creating, I don't even try to analyze that. I just cook on all four burners and am thankful if I'm able to get something out.
Steve Sheen.
John, is there some pet project that you're dying to have the time, the creative time to get to? I think either in your performance today or in one of your earlier answers, you talked about starting to experiment a little bit with unrhymed verse. Is there something else? I mean, is that a path you want to go down, or is there something else you want to do? Maybe write a novel like Rebecca.
Oh, I actually am spending a lot of time working with free verse, but still I want it to have a rhythm and a move a little more, a little different than. I'm really growing in that area, but I am working on a project right now to put out an audio tape that I can market, and it's surprising what a big project that is. It's people used to give me their little free tapes, or people used to give me little tapes they did of themselves, music tapes, and I'd throw it in the box where I have dozens of those things, and never appreciated it so much till I started working on this month. That's my big project for the year.
Rebecca, we know you've got another novel in the works right now. Are you the kind of writer who likes multiple projects, or is that taking up all of your writing time right now?
Divine Secrets of a Yayo Sisterhood is taking up just about all of my time, with doing performances here and there from little altars, and every once in a while a reading from the new book of material that's in process. But I'm going to have my hands full finishing that book.
Again, something you're doing so much already, not just performing, but writing in more than one form, novels, screenplays. Is there something else you'd really like to do if you could capture a little
I'd
time?
like a house in Tuscany for 3 minutes. And I'd like to gain 15 pounds, eat, read a lot of Flaubert, and swim and nap and hang out with my husband. That's what I'd like to do.
Doesn't sound bad.
Good answer.
On that note, I bring our program to a conclusion. On behalf of our panel and our staff, I would like to thank Rebecca Wells and John J. Coombe for being not only at the symposium at North Idaho College, but on this given program. I wish you both well in your future endeavors, and I thank both of you for your stimulating our audience. Ladies and gentlemen, I know you've enjoyed this program, and I invite you to be with us again next week at the same time, and we are going to continue to discuss the arts and humanities. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
The North Idaho College Public Forum was videotaped live from the studios of Instructional Technology on the campus of North Idaho College for viewing at this more appropriate time. We invite you to join us again next week for another all-new edition of the North Idaho College Public Forum on this public television station.